Okay, so welcome to Measuring Progress with the 10 Steps 2019. My name is Claire Collins and I'm Senior Products and Services Manager here at Wise, and I'm going to be running you through a summary of the 10 Steps signatory data from the 2019 event that we held a month or so ago. We're going to have a look at a recap of how the signatories are progressing in the 10 steps and the areas that they do really well in, the ones that they continue to struggle a little bit more. And we're going to look at some of those recurring issues and look at some of the best practices and case studies in those areas. I am going to assume for the purposes of this webinar that everybody present has a basic knowledge of the WISE 10 steps and the business case for diversity. If in future you'd like to go and remind yourself of the business case and you'd like to have a look at last year's webinar, which goes into a little bit more detail about 10 steps, then please do click on these links when the slides are made available after the webinar. So looking at the statistics for 2018, we can see that generally in core STEM occupations, number of women across the board is increasing for the most part, not always as a percentage due to the number of men who are joining as well, but we continue to struggle in the IT professional occupations and particularly in engineering. Those numbers are quite low still, and still numbers of senior women are significantly lower than we would still like them to be. So we're trying to encourage progress in those areas. And of course, the WISE 10 steps is one of the frameworks that we use and we encourage our member organisations to sign up to. So this year it's been a really good year for us. We've had a lot of new signatories join from Amazon, Birmingham City University, Emerson, IMI, KBR, Lloyds Banking Group, NATS, RES, CISC and TSP projects. So it's been really nice to see all these new members coming in and participating in the event and submitting their data. So the really exciting bit. So let's have a look at the results for 2019 for the cohort. So overall, we had 43 attendees at the event last month and 32 different companies, which is fantastic. That's the largest number of companies we've had submit to date. And it really helps us with getting a broad understanding of the issues facing companies and the areas in which they continue to struggle across diversity and inclusion generally. So the ranking for this year, we can see that actually the ranking has been done 2019 on the left-hand side, 2018 in the middle, and 2017. And you can see that overall, there's not a lot of change, really. The steps that companies continue to do really well in vary a little bit in terms of how the organisations have submitted their diagnostics, but overall, making flexible work a reality, changing mindsets by challenging bias and sexism, approaching like a business improvement project, and understanding the starting point are all areas in which companies seem to do very well. Where there's a little bit of a change this year from 2018 results was the moving of the being creative in job design, moved from step 8, so it was ranked 8th last year, has gone up to 5th this year. And if you look further down, you can see that that step has effectively moved with the sponsoring female talent. So it's been interesting to see those little changes. But overall, again, the steps in the middle are the ones that continue to stay in the middle and the ones that companies really still tend to struggle with their steps, educating leaders, giving them accountability, sponsoring female talent to the same extent as male talent, and increasing the transparency of those opportunities for progression. All of those tend to be areas which are led by the business, and it can be very difficult for HR professionals and diversity specialists to be able to get those changes driven through a company, to drive them through from senior management all the way through middle management and really make a change in the company. It's not a surprise that they often are ranked in the lower parts of the 10 steps. That's effectively what I've just said. After a drop in its ranking last year, as we said, the being creative and job design has leapt up to 5th and sponsoring female talents dropped down to 9th. Sometimes these scores are so similar that actually it can make quite a change in the ranking, but it's not quite as significant as it would seem to be. But it's just really interesting to see mostly that on average all of these steps are staying the same in terms of how well companies are doing in them, and the ones that continue to need a little bit more guidance, a little bit more support. So the majority of the companies are increasing their average score year on year. We've had a number of new signatories this year, and it's been really nice to see that they're showing a nice positive start to their 10 steps journeys. Some of the new signatories were actually some of the signatories that did best on our responses this year, and it's just so nice to hear about their best practices and to encourage them to put forward case studies. Now, as per previous years, some organisations are decreasing in their score. And often when you look into the reasons behind this, it can be due to reasons, for example, like the fact that responses have been compiled from a group of people submitting their diagnostic responses, as opposed to just a single person submitting the diagnostic response. And that can give you a lower score sometimes, because you're actually getting more of an understanding about how the organisation as a whole sees the progress and diversity and inclusion across the organisation, as opposed to just often how somebody in diversity or HR who knows a lot about these areas sees the progress in those areas. And so it's not something to worry about necessarily for year on year. It's when you see that constant decrease downwards that would continue to be a problem. But actually, what's really nice to see is we've taken 10 companies here who have submitted scores year on year. We wanted to see if the 10 steps is actually making an effect. Is it having an effect on their results? Are they improving their diversity efforts across the board? And so this compares, the line in blue is each of those companies from 1 to 10. They've been anonymised, so you won't be able to tell who they are. And the scores on the left-hand side from 50 to about 100 is the scores from the diagnostic. And this line in blue shows 2019 results. The line in orange shows the 2018 results. If you continue to look back through the last 4 years, so the grey line is now indicating the 2017 results, and now the yellow line is indicating the 2016 results, you can see very clearly that year on year, nearly every single one of these companies has made significant progress in the 10 steps framework. And on average, it's been at least a 10% increase in the step progress from the last 4 years. And often year to year, you can see almost a 10% increase in those scores. So it's a really positive move. It's a really nice result to show that, across the board, all of these companies are doing really well and showing improvements in the 10 steps. This year also, we decided that we wanted to look at sectors. So we took all the organisations who submitted diagnostics to us, and we separated them out into different sectors, just to see if there was anything we could determine from looking at the different sectors and the results in those sectors. And we made sure there was a minimum of 3 companies per sector in this analysis, which would mean that some companies do appear in multiple sectors, especially for the larger firms. But what was really interesting to see is that it's no real trend particularly. Manufacturing is potentially lower in the 10 steps diagnostic than other areas, construction, but those are organisations which often struggle with areas like flexible working, offering those flexible working policies, and so it becomes more difficult for them to achieve well in some of these areas. So interestingly, the organisations, defence and aerospace, which do really, really well in the sectors, really nice to see that they are performing very strongly. And again, transport, an area that you wouldn't necessarily associate with high diagnostic, high diversity and inclusion efforts, it's really nice to see that on average their diagnostic score is nice and high. So again, really a plea for more data. We've had a large number of our signatories this year provided information to us for the 10 Steps workshop and for the 10 Steps Measuring Progress event. And 81% of those provided data on the number of female employees, which is fantastic news. It just shows that companies are really starting to get a handle on the number of female employees they have within an organisation, and it's fantastic they can provide that data to us. 50% of our signatories provided data on the number of female roles within STEM roles, and so again, that's just really nice to see. But more data will always mean more robust findings and better recommendations, and ultimately more effective actions for our members. So we really encourage you, if you haven't submitted that additional data year on year, please do, place efforts for over the next year to be able to measure all of that, all the information about the number of females in specific roles, the number of senior females, the number of females reporting to a CEO. Put in place those measurements, and we guarantee that it will give you results across the diversity board that give you so much information about how well you're doing in all these different areas. And ultimately for us, it gives us that information, the actions that we can share for our members and encourage best practice again. As always, this year it's been a good year for all the events we've run. We've had a number of knowledge sharing events, and big research projects have been published. If you haven't been on the website recently to go and have a look at these case studies and the best practices, we really strongly encourage you to go on and have a look at them. There's the Women Innovation knowledge sharing event. There's the gender pay gap research done with the RSC. Amazon did a report on why women become innovators. All of this information is freely available to anybody who is a member, and we strongly encourage you to go on. We try to make it as practical as possible, and we put in lots of information about best practices and about the steps that can be taken in these different areas. So I thought what would be a bit different this year for the webinar, rather than just focusing on the results of the signatories, is to think about some of the successes that our signatories have had over the years and some of the programs they've run. And I particularly wanted to focus on a few of the steps that companies do continue to struggle in year in year. And so I thought it'd be worthwhile to share some of the best practices around those areas and highlight some of the case studies and some of the recommendations that you can improve in your company. Of course, first one is educate your leaders. It's always a difficult area to think about, having to tell people who are higher than you that you need to make a change. You need to make these cultural changes across the board. It's not easy, and we all totally understand why it often comes low on the number of steps. But there's some very simple steps that can be taken, some questions you can ask of people in the business. Do your leaders understand this business case for diversity? Have you shown them the business case that is on the WISE website? Have you illustrated the facts and figures in the McKinsey reports? Have you looked at all the other research that's out there about the diversity facts and figures? Much of it is on our website and linked to other reports and research, so please do go on, have a look at those results, and that data and that information, more than anything else, helps you to push the business case to your leaders, to tell them why it's really important to make these changes. Do your leaders ultimately have the same core ambitions and the same aims as the rest of the business? It sounds like a silly question, but often leaders talk about doing the right thing. Are they actually practicing those right things in reality? Can you help? Can you change? Can you encourage them to take part in flexible working policies, or to encourage them to work more flexibly, to encourage them to have more female employees, to share your role models across the board? Do any of your senior staff do mentoring? Do they lead by example when it comes to your diversity policies? Do you have senior female role models? All of these are really crucial to building that change and making that case as to why diversity needs to be top of the agenda in many organisations. So I just wanted to have a look at some of the best practice opportunities that many of our members have shared with us in the last year. And it comes across time and time again that role models are really critical to showcasing progression pathway. If you don't have those high senior female role models, then you are not making it easy for lower females in lower paid roles to see that progression, to see that opportunity for change, and to see that opportunity to develop their career. Is management training gender unbiased? Can you set realistic diversity targets? Don't set a target of 50% when your team is currently down at 12 or 13%. Be sensible at what you can achieve and look at the policies and the practices that you're putting in place. Make sure that these targets are something that can be aimed for in a few years' time. There's increasingly a perception that diversity is a threat to existing leaders. Those leaders need to see the business case. They need to see the facts and figures, and they need to understand that the need for diversity isn't always the same as planning action. Again, actions speak much louder than words. And finally, the conversations and the topic at our CXO breakfast, that middle management penetration, trying to break through diversity policies through to people who are doing a day job that they need to achieve facts, figures, they need to achieve a particular role, they need to get those sales figures up. Whatever it is, they are planning those actions. Diversity isn't top of their agenda. You need to make time for them to have that diversity conversation, to have that training, to have those skills, and to be able to lead those conversations through. The CXO breakfast write-up is on our website, and I strongly advise you to go and have a look if you're interested in this particular topic. Just a case study from one of our members, Bechtel. So Bechtel have a leadership program where their senior managers, men and women, act as mentors to others in the organization. They set their performance targets, they're informed by annual staff surveys, and they have managers held accountable for those outcomes. The Women at Bechtel operates as an employee forum open to anybody, and crucially, it's sponsored by a senior executive who's seen to drive this policy and this need for improvement throughout the organisation. Diversity and inclusion is being built into the company's fundamental visions and values, and they communicate it. They talk about what they're going to do, and they set it top of their agenda. All managers with 2 or more direct reports are trained in unconscious bias. It's mandatory. Managers and above also receive 360-degree appraisals. Just some of the ideas and some of the ways in which this company is struggling and trying to turn around that need to educate your leaders. Similarly, often the educating your leaders step relies on engaging men. It's traditionally a lot of senior men at higher levels. You need to engage those men in diversity. And how can you do that? Well, one of the best ways to encourage men to get involved in diversity and to champion it and become male allies is to encourage them to be champions at all levels of seniority. You want to drive male involvement. Why should it have to be down to the females and the women in the organisation to deliver that change? Males should be sponsored, they should be on board, and it's really crucial to have leaders showing that you genuinely need to make a change rather than just seeing as a tick box exercise. They again need to understand that business case, and they need to have the ability to make a change and the option to move forward with those if they can. Again, leading on identifying and sharing positive role models and stories is really crucial and critical to the success of engaging men in diversity. We've got a fantastic webinar done a couple of months ago where we had our male Wise Award winner, Man of the Year, Alistair Henderson from BAM Nuttall gave a webinar a couple of months ago. If you're interested in finding out more about how to engage men and how to drive male support, drive male allies within an organisation, I really strongly recommend that you go and have a look at that webinar. We'll make sure we put links onto that as well. Showcase the examples of men sharing parental duties. so often we hear from our member organisations that actually that's the men that really like to take advantage of these flexible working options. They like to have that opportunity to spend more time with their children, and often they will need just as much to take time off in lieu for all these various options. It's also important to stress that supporting women in the workplace doesn't have to preclude supporting men. These policies should be open to anybody, regardless of age, regardless of gender. It should be a flexible working policy that benefits everyone. When you start having policies that only offer advantages to females, that's when you start to build resentment, and that's when it becomes difficult to drive male engagement and male involvement. Really, I can't stress enough how crucial it is that all of these policies should be gender neutral to benefit everybody. So planning your success, having an action plan in place. Just some of the things you can look through after we've talked about them. So do your leaders understand that business case? How can you get it through to them? Have you trained managers in or leaders in unconscious bias? Do you train recruiting managers in unconscious bias? Do leaders have performance targets set? Do you have sponsors and mentors throughout the organisation that can act to provide career support and involvement for women? Do managers lead by example in the area of flexible working policies and childcare benefits? So what does all of this mean to your organisation? What plans could you put in place? Any small ones, potentially only a small step, but something to really drive change throughout the organisation. The other two steps that often come low are sponsoring female talent to the same extent as male talent. I'd just like to highlight, I'm not going to go through it in detail today, as maybe for another webinar, but I'd just like to highlight a couple of the case studies that we have on our website. So we have an excellent case study from Mace about the women of the future, and we have one from Siemens about their women in leadership. There's facts, figures, and information about how both of these organisations led in this area, so please do go on and have a look as soon as these slides are available afterwards. And similarly, increasing opportunities for progression, looking at all of those different areas in which women and men can progress equally throughout an organisation to drive the number of senior females within an organisation. And again, Rolls-Royce have an excellent case study on our website for a people development framework that they run. Finally, on the 10 steps, I'd just like to encourage our members to remember that they have got access to the 10 steps workshop, and it is free to all of our premium strategic members each year. So if you haven't taken opportunity to make the most of your membership with this workshop, please do go on to find your membership manager, partnership manager now, and ask them to give you details on the workshop. Workshops are also available to core and online members. There's a small cost for doing the workshop. Alternatively, we're always very happy, our partnership managers are always very happy to give advice and to give some guidance on the phone about your 10 steps programs and about the way in which you can progress on these different steps. So please don't hesitate to get in contact with us. So what are we going to be doing in the future with the 10 steps? Crucially, we're looking to increase the number of best practice and case studies. The more information we have that we can share with our members, we do this through our knowledge sharing events, we have it through our CXO breakfast, all the research that we're developing, more and more information we're gaining on our website. We're working on ways to improve the communication with our members and to be able to showcase these best practice and case studies in a simple way that's easily accessible for all. We're also looking to update the diagnostic tool, and we're looking to streamline answers and provide further insights. So hopefully we'll be able to get something online where people can submit online, and we can look at ways to improve the questions and think about how we can improve the results we get in future. Sorry. We're also looking to develop more tools for career returners and retraining. We've just recently, yesterday actually, held our knowledge sharing event on career returners. There, again, some amazing case studies and some best practices came out of that. It will be written up into a report and again on our website. I can't stress enough that you need to go onto our website and go and have a look if you haven't looked recently. So just to remind you of the many resources that WISE have on the website, if you want more information on the 10 steps, if you need information about registering to become an online member and gain access to our newsletter, all of our members can register with their corporate email addresses. Jobs board, there's a number of free jobs offered to all of our member organisations each year, so if you haven't taken advantage of that, please do. And then as I've already mentioned, we have the knowledge sharing events and a variety of different research opportunities to get involved with, and details of the events is on the calendar, or email your partnerships manager for more information about any of the research projects that they send out. We also have the WISE Young Professionals Board, which I believe has just closed its nominations for this year, but hopefully we'll have some new members and we'll be able to send those details out soon. Okay, so that's me done. Ruth, did you have any questions come through?
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, we've had two questions that are two sides of the same coin. So the first is, are the companies who are making positive progress to create a better gender balance seeing an effect on their gender pay gap? And the reverse of that, we've also had, has there been any research done on the gender pay gap's effect on diversity?
Okay, so the gender pay gap's a very interesting one. We actually looked at it in more detail at the actual Measuring Progress event, and we correlated the gender pay gap for each of the different companies that submitted a diagnostic to the 10 steps Measuring Progress event this year, and we actually found there was actually very little correlation between the gender pay gap itself and the results of the 10 steps diagnostic. So companies that do really well in their flexible working policies in all the other areas of the 10 steps and have a high diagnostic result, you would expect to potentially have a lower gender pay gap. But surprisingly, some of those companies still did have a high gender pay gap. And of course, that could be related back to the number of senior females within the organisation. But it's just a really interesting area. There's a lot of research in it. We did a knowledge sharing event with the Royal Society of Chemistry on it earlier in the year. And there were a lot of questions about how the gender pay gap could be modified, so that in future we could think about how companies can change the data they collect to get more accurate data on what is important to them within the organisation beyond the work that's done as standard and collected by the ONS. There was also a gender pay gap research area done in the last year. We've been doing it with the RAE, looking at the gender pay gap specifically with regard to engineers, and that report should hopefully be out within the next couple of months. I think it's due out in January from the RAE, so that's worth keeping an eye out for as well.
Thank you very much. Well, you've all been very quiet and we've not got any more questions, unless anybody can type very quickly. We'll give you a moment to type any questions in. No, doesn't look like there are any. So I'll say thank you very much, Claire. That was interesting. And as Claire's mentioned, that will be shared in a link to you all tomorrow in an email. And there'll also be a link to provide any feedback if you would wish to do so. So thank you very much for taking part. Hope you found the content useful. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you.